A humanitarian update on Yemen. The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that the ongoing conflict has significantly exasperated the humanitarian need for millions of people. For instance, in the Hajj Governorate, nearly the entire population has been affected, and people need access to food, water, shelter, and sanitation. The suspension of commercial flights to Yemen continues to limit access for international humanitarian staff in and out of the country. Operations at seaports are also restricted. Armed clashes in southern Yemen have inhibited the delivery of supplies to areas with the greatest needs. Despite these challenges, a second aircraft loaded with life-saving supplies from UNICEF arrived at Sana'a International Airport yesterday, bringing nearly 76 metric tons of antibiotics, bandages, and syringes, as well as IV sets and other materials. UNICEF adds that the food and fuel crisis is intensifying rapidly. Supply ships carrying wheat and fuel were recently refused entry at Hodeida port. Also, the Food and Agriculture Organization said today that nearly 10.6 million Yemenis are now severely food insecure, of which 4.8 million are facing emergency conditions, suffering from severe lack of food access, very high and increasing malnutrition, and irreversible destruction of livelihoods. So far, more than 730 people have been killed and nearly 2,760 have been injured, according to WHO. Meanwhile, the UN Refugee Agency reports that more than 1,200 people fleeing conflict have arrived in Djibouti and Somalia over the past 2 weeks, and it is now making contingency plans to receive an additional 30,000 refugees in Djibouti and 100,000 in Somalia over the next 6 months. These are.
Thank you, Stefan. Regarding Yemen, these figures about 730 killed, people on the ground and reporters mention over 2,000 killed, mostly civilians. Today, for example, a whole family was wiped out in Sada. The market place was targeted by aerial bombardments. Also in Hijja, you mentioned Hijja, that there's a dire need for food and water. The water supplies were targeted by aerial bombardment. And Hijja is adjacent to Saudi Arabia.
Sure,
that means people can flee.
Nizar, what is your question, my friend?
The question is here, it seems there is systematic targeting of civilians in this aerial campaign, and people are denied access. As you mentioned in Hodeida, the floor was not allowed.
I'm still not hearing a question mark.
Yeah, here, I mean, what is the position of the United Nations regarding the targeting of civilians systematically and the number of civilians killed?
I think thank you for your question, Nizar. The Secretary General, the humanitarian coordinators, and I think for Yemen and others, have repeatedly called loudly and clearly for all those involved in the current conflict to respect international humanitarian law and international law, notably not to target civilian infrastructures, be they schools, water treatment facilities, and so forth. We are working very hard to try to deliver aid. I think, as you just heard, food ships with food on board have been denied access. We have managed to land a plane in to our colleagues at UNICEF with medical supplies. We'll continue to try to get as much aid in as possible, and that's why we're repeatedly called for cessation of the violence and for humanitarian aid to be able to reach those who need it freely and as soon as possible.
Who denied the ships access to Hodeida?
I don't have. I'll try to get some details from OCHA, but obviously it is people who have the capacity to do that.
Has the Saudis allowed any refugees to cross the border into Saudi Arabia, well, since Hijja is very close to
we will ask our UNHCR colleagues if they have an update on that. Yes, and then Mr. Lee.
On Yemen again, the Egyptians have sent troops to Saudi Arabia. They are carrying out exercises with the Saudis with the intention of land attack against Yemen. How does the United Nations view that?
I can't predict what what military actions countries will take. Obviously, I think we've seen reports of military exercises. I don't know what the end game will be. I have no specific. We have no specific insight on that. As a general rule, obviously, we very much hope that countries will focus on de-escalation and cessation of the violence.